Good. Not too
Good.
bad. You?
Yeah, great.
How are you?
Great.
Yeah.
So,
We're having such a big traffic jam tonight. So because of the big rain, so some students they might get into the class a bit later
okay, because there is an event.
of the rain. Yeah, because of the rain.
Ah, because of the rain.
Yeah.
It's raining.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we can start. And in any case, we will record the sessions. Okay. Do you hear me, everyone?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Great. So you can use also this kind of things, huh? Like this. Okay, just to know. Okay, or you have other ones. Huh? You can use the ones, or if you are a bit angry, or whatever. Okay. So you can use like this. I can see how you feel, and also I have at least some reactions, because just to be behind a black screen is not so comfortable. Okay, let's start. Thank you very much for all your works, all your papers. Very interesting, and I summarize them in an Excel file. So I start to share the screen. Oops, this is not for. Okay. Is this record? First of all, I would like to be sure. Okay, we start the
recording in progress.
Okay, I share. Okay, and I would like to start. With the the investment detective case. I received, in fact, your answers, and I summarize your results here in the yellow part for the investment detective. And I would like to comment. Okay, to comment your results. For this one, I forgot, I think. Just let me think. No, it's okay. Just let me think. 784. Or let me just. Yeah, this is just one that I have to fill in. And 7. Okay. No, that's not correct. Excuse me. That's not correct. It's not this one. Excuse me. I would like just. Let me think. There is just one group, because I was a bit disturbed when I did it. Okay. I have all your papers with me. 348. PI and 8 here. Y equals. Okay, like this I can comment everything. Okay, let's start. Okay. So there are still things that are not so clear at this stage. For the question one, let's assume you have no constraints in terms of financial sources. Which one would you undertake? In fact, most of the groups said, okay, all of the projects except two, except the project two. Why? Because the project two has a negative NPV. And this I fully understand. And for the other ones, okay, you said the NPV is positive, we have no financial constraints, so it's a good idea to invest. I follow you on this path, absolutely. But I have a comment for one group, and which is quite interesting to say. They said, okay, well, we will also invest in two. Why? Because we have a internal rate of return of 6%. I said, okay, well, it's still a good return, and why not to invest? Yes, that's not a bad view, let's say like this. Now we have to understand what's the meaning of a negative NPV and the meaning of this. The meaning of this is the 6.3. Okay, the 6.3% is lower than the 10%. So, and then it implies that the NPV is negative. So this implies the NPV is negative. Okay. So the thing is, logically, from a financial perspective, we could say we do not invest in that project because for a project with a similar risk, we could get more, we could get 10% instead of 6.3. So that's why I do not want to invest, and the NPV is negative, minus 85. So it means that the present value of what I can expect with the project is lower for an amount of 85. Lower in comparison to what? Once again, in comparison to a project I would invest, or I could invest in with a project with a similar risk. So when I understand this, okay, so I understand meaning that, okay, you still earn something, but you earn less than you could expect on the financial markets. Okay. Okay, now for the next question, to rank the top three. You see, we have different rankings. Okay, many of you put number 3. Okay, so 5 groups out of 7. But 2 groups put number 7. Now here I would like to mention a few things. Be aware. Here there are some confusions, and we are ready to be aware about the confusions. We have to avoid those confusions in the future. First of all, when I look at the table, the first thing, we should not take this into account. Why we should not take this into account? We have to forget this in our decision. Why? Because those amounts are not discounted. We do not take into account the time value. And you remember what we did when I was in Saigon. Okay, it's extremely important to take into account the present value, to take into account the time value. Okay, we discussed it with several examples, and one of the examples was the mortgage financing case. You remember? So if you do not take into account the time value, you can be misled and you can take wrong decisions. Okay, so this, you cannot look at this because you don't take into account the time value of money. So we have to forget this too. So for some groups who mention, okay, well, we look at the sum of the cash flows and it's good to take number 3 and number, I don't know, and number 5 and number 8 because the cash flows are, the sum of the cash flows are the highest. That's incorrect. Once again, because we do not take into account the time value. Another thing that I would like to discuss with you. When you have to rank the project, do not use the internal rate of return. To rank the project, do not use the internal rate of returns. Why? Because if you remember, last time, we discussed plenty of pitfalls with the internal rate of return. And for instance, one pitfall was, okay, the timing problem. According to the period when you receive the cash flows, it can affect the internal rate of return. And then the ranking for the internal rate of return and the NPVs are different, okay, if you remember. So to classify, to rank your project based on the internal rate of return, this is extremely dangerous. The highest is not always the better. Why? Look, for instance, here you have the highest internal rate of return, but the lowest NPV. Okay, so we have really to be aware about this. So then we do not to rank the project with, for sure, we do not have to look at the internal rate of return. So after the question is the NPV. We could choose we could decide to look for the ones with the highest NPV. For instance, we could take number 3, number 4, and number 7. Okay. If we just rely on the NPV. And here, the next question arrives. The next question is, you have two next questions. The first one is what some people said, especially the people who decided to go for 7 first instead of number 3. They say, okay, well, because the payback period is very high, 15 years. We have to wait 15 years before collecting money, before collecting our added value. And that's true. Okay. Then you have, with the payback period, a complementary information. So it's not, the payback period is not a criteria to take into your decisions, is a complementary information. And this complementary information tells, 15 years before getting your added value. Even if it is the highest NPV, you have to wait a long term. And then the question here that you tackle is the question linked to the liquidity. Okay, so it depends to what extent your asset is liquid or not. Okay. For instance, it's a term deposit over 15 years and you cannot get your money, whatever happens, you cannot get your money back. It could be extremely dangerous, okay? Because if you need the money, you cannot use it. Or you can imagine another financial asset like a zero coupon bond. It's a bond that does not offer you any coupon during the life of the asset of the bond, and you receive everything at the end. And if this asset is traded on the stock market or is traded on the financial markets, you can say, okay, well, I can invest in that project because if I want to sell it, there is a liquid market, and normally I do not have any problems to sell it in case I need the money. Okay? So of course you need to look at the context behind. Or if you have plenty of projects and it's one out of many projects, when you can have a portfolio of projects with different timing for the cash flows, why not? Okay, so for sure, I repeat, you have to look at the context. Okay, so it's the one with the highest NPV. After, that's true, you have to look at the questions about the liquidity. Is it a liquid asset? Do you need liquidities? And so on. Okay. Then I would like to move directly to the next question, and then I come back. And I ask, what do you prefer? 7 or 8? 7 or 8? Now, 5 groups decided to go for 7, and 2 groups decided to go for 8. And in fact, here, everybody can be right or can be wrong. It depends on the explanation that you give behind. Okay. So, but for sure, be aware. Okay. You do not have to look at the internal rate of return to compare the projects. Okay, we already discussed it. Okay. You do not have to look at the payback. Okay, you cannot take this into account as the only criteria as decisions, and neither the internal rate of return, as we already discussed. Okay, so be aware about your arguments. Okay, it's important to understand. Okay. What to look at? So some students decided to go with number 8 because it has the highest NPV. But there is an issue between 7 and 8. What is the issue? The issue is that the life of the projects are different. For the first one, 5 years. For the next one, 7 years. And so here you generate 165 over 5 years. Here 183 over 7 years. And it's not exactly the same, so you cannot compare the two amounts. Okay. Now there is the first case now. The first case, if you are in an ongoing company, meaning that when your project is over, after 5 years for this one, for instance, you decide to go for the next one. You decide to reinvest. Okay? So you are in an ongoing concern perspective. If you are in such a case, then you have to look at the equivalent annual reviews. Okay, so the one for which you get the highest equivalent NPV is the highest equivalent annual NPV. You take the highest one, not the lower one, but the highest one. Okay, you take the one with the highest equivalent annual review. This is the case if you are in an ongoing perspective. Now, second case, you can say, I am not in an ongoing perspective. Okay. I am, so in an ongoing perspective, I will take this one. You can tell I am not in an ongoing perspective. I am in a one-shot project. Okay, let's assume I am 60. It's the last project. I undertake the project, and after the business is closed. Why not? Then maybe I have the interest to take the one with the highest NPV because I am not in ongoing concern. I am in a one-shot project. Okay, so for a one-shot project, I have the interest maybe to take number 8. Okay, so to summarize, what is important is to look at the NPV. If you have different timings, look at the equivalent annual reviews. Okay, and if you have different amount to invest, which is not the case, you look at the profitability index. Okay. But to compare the project, certainly don't look at the internal rate of return, don't look at the payback period. These can be complementary information for sure. Okay, these, I repeat, complementary information, but certainly not criteria to use to decide between different projects or to rank the projects. Okay. For instance, if I look between 7 and 8, you see, for instance, you see this is the one with the lowest NPV, but the highest equivalent annual revenue. And the highest internal rate of return. This one has a higher NPV in comparison to the previous one, but a lower internal rate of return. Once again, to show you that according to the criteria, you have different rankings. In any case, look at the NPV. If you have different maturities, different economic life of the project, take the equivalent annual revenues. And if the size of the project are different, either take the equivalent annual revenue or the profitability index. Okay. But in any case, I think the best one when you have to compare mutually exclusive projects is this one. Okay. Now, just a few other comments, just a few. Once again, when you are a company, you are a sponsor of project, or you have to discuss a project, be aware, because some people try sometimes to thank you, okay, to overload you with a lot of information that you don't need, in fact. Okay, you have really to be aware. You have really to be aware. Okay. About the significance of the data. Okay, and you know, some people can arrange them in order to arrange themselves to have their in order to get their own project be chosen by the top management. No, the idea is to have the adequate criteria. Okay, for instance, the equivalent annual revenue, but certainly not, okay, take my project because the payback period is the lowest, or the internal rate of return is the highest. You know, no, really try to understand the significance of the results that you have on one hand, and also the criteria, the decision criteria to use. Sometimes you have to justify the analysis also by taking other arguments that I will just explain on the next slide. And also be aware about the people, oh, you do not want to take the project? Okay, well, let's give up and so on. You know, when the people are too extremes, it's also dangerous. You can always complement your analysis with real options. What does it mean, real options? I will just mention this. You have some explanations in the chapter 7 from the Higgins book. I uploaded also the chapter on Claroline, just to give you what it is about. When you have to support a project, to defend a project, okay, you can add some additional arguments. For instance, the real options. Okay. So what is it? Is the right, but not the obligation, to undertake some business decision. For instance, to make, to delay, to give up, to expand. Okay, so for instance, maybe I will undertake this project even if it has a negative NPV at this stage, but I will undertake it because it will give me maybe in the future the opportunity to expand. If I don't do it, I cannot expand in the future. Okay, then it's worthwhile to take these options into account. And you can do it, this, for instance, with scenario analysis. Or to say, okay, well, I invest in this project. I know, okay, well, the value is not so good, but if something wrong happens, okay, then I can transform the project. I can generate additional value and so on. I'll give you an example. Here, well, in Brussels, well, many years ago, a company decided to invest in the biggest movie theater in the world. It was in the 80s. Well, no, it's not the biggest one, but in the 80s, it was the biggest one in the world. Okay, and they invested in Brussels. And it was highly risky, of course, highly risky. And when you go still now in this movie theater, okay, to go to the first floor, you have a very, very big path, okay, very, very, very large. And in fact, why this? Because the idea was, in case the movie theater didn't work, they could transform it to a parking, okay? So in fact, the movie theater was built in such a way could be transformed into a parking in case the project didn't work, just as an example, okay? So be aware when we look at the CFO, what do the CFOs use? The internal rate of return in many cases, but it's very dangerous, as I mentioned. So be aware. Okay, really be aware. Okay.
Excuse me.
Wait a minute. I just take your question in a minute. So be aware. The net present value, 75%. Payback period, a lot, even if it's not a good one. The profitability index, only 11%. And what you can see, okay, for the equivalent annual APV or the equivalent annual revenue, nobody, why it is the best one, okay? So be aware to look at this one when you have to choose between different topics, different projects. Okay. Okay. Yes. Questions?
Yes. It's just a small question because you insist that this rate is sometimes very dangerous. So which one do you think that's the most dangerous that we should avoid from?
The one that you should avoid. It depends really what you are doing. When you want to compare between different projects to rank them, when you have to rank the project, to classify the projects, avoid the payback period, and avoid the internal rate of return. Okay. Look at the equivalent annual revenue and the NPV. And when you have different maturities, different economic life, okay, then you have to. The internal rate of return, in fact, what is interesting is, you have a project, you do not want to compare with other projects. You have a project, you calculate your internal rate of return, and your internal rate of return, let's say, is 15%. And then after, you can run a discussion with your colleagues in the company. Do you think 15% is good enough or not, given our business, given our perspectives, given and so on? In that perspective, okay, well, fair enough, but not to compare between different projects because of all the disadvantages that we mentioned.
Yes. Right. Okay. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I noticed. Thank you.
You're welcome. Is it clear for everyone?
Professor?
Yes.
What is the formula of the EIR? Because I try to reproduce the formula, I cannot have the same result. I use the EAC in the slide, but it's different.
I am not sure to. So to calculate the internal rate of return,
Yes.
you can calculate with the Excel file. So with Excel, you can calculate with Excel, and you have a formula internal rate of return.
I mean the equivalent annual revenue.
The equivalent annual revenue. To calculate the equivalent annual revenue, what you have to do, once you have your NPV, let's do it together. Let's do it together. Why it doesn't work? Yes. Okay. Well. Okay. Let's take. I hope it will work. Let's take for the project number 7. Okay. To calculate the equivalent revenue, what is it? In fact, it's the equivalent value that I could generate over 5 years. So it's like if I look like the payment, in fact, if I take my annuity formula, I insert a function, I take the payment formula. Here is the payment that I would receive. So my rate is 10%. Number of payment 5 because it's over 5 years. The present value, it's minus 2,000, right? Because it first is an expense. I expense 2,000 to receive something. Wait. The present value, excuse me. The present value, excuse me. The present value is 165, excuse me. Is 165. Zero, zero, and you see that I have the 43. Okay. In fact, I use it with my annuity formula. If you remember, what did I do with Excel? With Excel, what I did, okay, the present value is the equivalent annual revenues times the annuity factor minus the one there. 1 plus R exponent T. Okay, is what I did with the Excel formula. So this is 165. I do it for project 7. Okay, the R is the 10%, which is given. Okay, and the T 5 years. Okay? This is the way. So equivalently, my NPV of 165 is the same if I would receive 43 of NPV each year during 5 years. That's the meaning. Okay?
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. Okay. Okay. What I suggest now is we will move on with the next case, the case to drink or not to drink. If I remember well, we already discussed that formula. So I take the handout number 7. Okay. Okay, when I was in Ho Chi Minh City, we discussed that formula or not? You don't see my screen, maybe. Can you tell me if we discussed that one? I am quite sure, yes, but I would like to check. We discussed that one?
Not yet, Professor. Not yet.
Not yet, Professor.
No?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Have we discussed it or not?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. So what I suggest now is to have a small break, 10 minutes, and we will discuss valuation, the project valuation and the case to drink or not to drink, right? So what I suggest, let's start again. Let's start again in 10 minutes. So we start at 7:25. Okay?
Okay, Professor.
Yes.
Okay, Professor.
Yes.
Okay.
Recording stopped.